take advantage of the extra time to leverage other things in your practice to grow it, to, see more exams a day, that's what I've done. We had a whole new column of exams because I wasn't seeing 100 patients a day. Yeah, it cost me $10, but if I can produce thousands of dollars more per day, I'm well ahead.
Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Orthopreneurs Podcast. Today, we are lucky because we have two amazing doctors, great educators. So double the fun here. I want to welcome to the podcast. Put your hands together for a warm Orthopreneurs welcome for Dr. Sean Holliday and Dr. Barry Glaser. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Believe me, it's my pleasure. And so as I start every episode, I'm going to start with you, Sean. If you can just give everybody a little bit of a background of, where are you, where'd you go to school, and kind of how'd you end up where you are now?
Let's see, I've been in practice since 2004. I practice in Hawaii, and I moved here from Chicago. I did my dental school in Kansas City, stayed in the Midwest in Chicago for ortho residency. And then I just was fed up with the windy city and the cold, the bitter, bitter cold. I'm originally from Costa Rica, so I'm actually more into the tropical, climate. So I moved to Hawaii, almost 18 years ago. Unique things about me is Hawaii. Everybody told me never go there. It's like the business climate there is terrible. You're going to struggle. It's tough. And it is a tough environment, and we quite literally live on an island, but I have grown a very successful practice, not to brag, but at the same time, it's just an accomplishment that I'm very proud of besides my family and my kids. My practice has been my other baby. And I just love orthodontics. I mean, clinical orthodontics drives me, but I also love the business aspect, running my own practice. We have 4 locations, 5 doctors. And, I love teaching and practicing and doing all kinds of things. And I'm just a tech junkie, which is the main reason why I'm here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sean. Barry, please tell us a little bit about your background and where you are.
Well, I'm just a country orthodontist. I don't live on an island. I live on a continent in the Northeast where it snows. It's a tough act to follow there, Sean. I went to Penn Dental. Actually, not as long as you did, but I practiced as a GP for a couple of years before Tony Gianelli took a chance on me and accepted me into BU's ortho program. I graduated there a long time ago, 30 years ago. Then another guy, George Cisneros, you guys probably know George. George took a chance on me right out of school and hired me as a full-time academic at Montefiore Medical Center. So I was full-time teaching research, some faculty practice too in the Bronx, which is crazy because I was born in the Bronx and I never thought I'd wind up back there again.
Nice.
And then for a variety of reasons, which we don't, that's a whole other podcast, but, I left full-time academics and bought a practice in suburban New York, about an hour north of New York City. And it just, I'm the opposite of you guys. I got one location, kind of more of a boutique practice. My brain it's hard enough handling one location. God bless you guys. But, yeah. And so I kind of get my teaching jollies in other ways, speaking for Align and DM and, my own stuff too. So it's a good life. I got lots to be grateful for.
Very nice. Yeah. We all have a lot to be grateful for, right?
Yeah.
So just as some background for people listening or watching right now, these are two gentlemen who are widely respected in the orthodontic world. The reason I really am drawn to both of you, Barry, I know we haven't had a chance to spend any really significant time together, but I know we've chatted here and there and it's been great. Sean and I had a chance to spend some quality time together back in the day when we were both KOLs for Henry Schein. And I met this guy and we started talking and, his love of tech and his love of business, kind of I'm going to sit by this guy's side the rest of the night. I'm just going to sort of pump his brain for everything I can get. And so the one thing I respect about both you gentlemen is that, you're both widely regarded as great clinicians, but you're also really in touch with the business side of orthodontics, right? Because while I want to be the best clinician I can possibly be in my lifetime, my driving force is really helping people lead more profitable, lower stress lives. There's a million voices out there who are better clinicians than I'll ever be, who can help teach that. But my goal is really to help people run better practices. And to that end, and lower their stress, obviously, especially today. to that end, one of the things that was going on online, there were some great discussions specifically about dental monitoring and those saying how it's changed their practices, changed their lives. Others who said, it's an extra expense. I don't need this in my life. And I started talking to Barry and said, you know what? I think we should have a little discussion about this in a podcast. And he suggested we bring Sean in, and it's going to be great today for everybody listening. And so the main driving discussion today, if this was a master's thesis, our null hypothesis is that, dental monitoring makes no difference in one's practice, right? But in reality, and full disclosure, Doug Shaw and myself, Doug's my partner, we implemented dental monitoring in our practice probably 4 months ago, 5 months ago, maybe a little bit longer. Doug is head of operations. He runs all things for the practice, helps set up everything. And my experience has been good. It's been good. But one of the things I want to do today is talk to these gentlemen about some of the things I've been facing, because maybe in your practice, remote monitoring is working perfectly. Like you say, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, or you might say, you know what, it's a little too strict. I'm getting too many pings of people that need to come in now or causing problems, or it might be a little too lax where people are coming in and you go, that fit doesn't look as good as I'd want it to. So these are the things I want to hash out, as well as some of the best practices. So, gentlemen, let's start, you guys can jump in whenever you want, but let's start first with you, Sean, if you don't mind, following the process we've been going with. How do you use dental monitoring in your practice, and any details you want to give about your practice itself? Are you seeing a lot of cases? I mean, I know the answer, but I don't know what you want to share, and how you're using dental monitoring in your practice on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, Glenn, I just want to start by saying that I'm a dental monitoring client. We've gone full on board, so I don't speak for them, but I am a believer in the technology. I started using it several years ago. And the interesting part is that a lot of the monitoring that's there today was where dental monitoring was several years ago. And I think to me, it was just a revelation talking to Barry and some other doctors of who were implementing it. Best practices. I tried, it just was frustrating. I didn't see it as an added value back then. It seemed like we spent extra time and extra expense, but things like any other technology evolve. And I would say it's not perfect, but it has evolved tremendously where it's very, very beneficial to our practice. So it's worth the investment from our side. We've jumped in, and basically every clear aligner case is being scanned at this stage. And a lot, like many of us, we started doing virtual during, COVID closures and all that kind of stuff to try to monitor our patients and trying to figure out what was going to work the best. We felt that in our practice, that dental monitoring was the market leader and certainly had, very interesting technology, but it has been a bit of a journey setting it up. But the tremendous thing about it is that it saves so much clinical time and increases our capacity because we are able to focus on the appointments that are relevant. So it's great from the patient's perspective so that they show up only when things are of significant value. For us, it's more productivity. But they only come in not for checks, but for actual scans or for updates. We minimize surprise visits. We are able to, keep really good track of the patients. And it's interesting because we are mostly a clear aligner practice, and most of the patients you're going to see in my clinic, if you come visit, is braces cases because they're the ones who have to come in regularly. And with dental monitoring, we were seeing at some point, I was seeing 80, 90 patients a day. Now I'm down to like 40, 50, 60 patients a day. And that's a game changer, I think, for us because we are, a very growing practice. We're growing significantly to the point that building capacity allows us to do same day starts, add other things into the schedule. I just don't like stress. I love working 3 to 4 days a week. I like to run very well, maximize what I do per day. But at the same time, I don't want to be like a chicken with my head cut off every day, trying to manage lots of stuff. So reducing all of that load by deferring this into the virtual has been a game changer for us.
Right on. Nice. And I'm gonna ask you in a minute, Sean. I want to go to Barry for a moment, but I'm going to ask you to dive in to some detail, which is what I'm going to ask you, Barry, to dive into some detail a little bit about how you're using it, right? So Doug and I came on board. Doug runs the operations of the office. I am kind of an associate compared to what Doug does. He kind of runs it, and I'm kind of chairman of the board. If there's a real big problem, he brings it to me. Otherwise,
I'd like that
he's
job.
running things. And so we have our way of doing it, and I know we're not using it as efficiently as we could. We're newbies, right? And I want to be crystal clear to everybody listening. I have no financial interest in dental monitoring. I think it's important to say that. They're no more than a sponsor at our summit, which I do have a financial interest, but not specifically dental monitoring. You know, all the companies that are there pay to be part of a summit, but I don't speak for them, and I have no other financial interest. I want to get that out of the way up front. And so if you can explain, Barry, how you use it in your practice, like if a patient comes in from scan through, next visit, how do you do it? Who's overseeing it? And then I'll come back to you, Sean, if there's anything that you're doing differently.
So first off, I am a speaker. That those three dirty letters, KOL. I'm a KOL for dental monitoring. Not being sponsored for this particular talk. Although, as some will point out, there's certainly you have to take that with a grain of salt because there's could be a bias there. But let's just get that out of the way. And we're all biased, I suppose. But having said that, before I get to your question, just a quick thought that maybe we can circle back to later. Because before we hit the record button, we were chatting a little bit, and you kind of see it, but like it's not dental monitoring hasn't like blown your socks off. Correct?
Right, exactly.
We can talk about that.
If you're going to say to me, what is my experience right now, 4 or 5 months in with dental monitoring, using it solely right now for aligners, not anything else, and we can talk more about that later. I would say if one on a scale of 10 was, I never want to hear this name ever again, and 10 is, I could not imagine my life without it because it actually has changed my life, I would call this a solid 7.5 to 8. That's where I'd put myself right now. It's definitely technology I enjoy having. It's really good, but sometimes I haven't sort of bought into it in terms of I see more error in it than I'd like to see right now. And that's something I think we can talk about afterwards.
Yeah. And you're not the only one, but it's interesting because when you first brought this up, I was trying to immediately think of some, potential reasons why. But when you said, you're like at month 4, that we can talk about that later, but that definitely explains, I think, a lot of where you are in the process. So we'll get back to that.
Great.
Back to that. But you want to know a little bit more about my workflow, right?
Exactly. I think hearing both of your workflows will probably solve a lot of problems for a lot of people listening and let us know what's the right way to go. And again, to be crystal clear for everybody out there, if you don't know Barry Glaser and you don't know Sean Holliday, if you've never met these gentlemen before, these are workflow guys. These are the guys that if you're having trouble, these are the guys you would, if they would, which they don't, you'd hire them to come into your office and set up your workflow because these are meticulous guys. So that's why I'm asking them this question. So thanks, Barry.
I'm laughing because I probably learned everything I know about workflow from Sean, but
who was a DM user first? You or Sean?
Sean was.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I was first, but I gave up on it long ago, and I've reinitiated thanks to Barry. Barry encouraged me back into it, and I've learned a lot from Barry, so I appreciate his input. But he changed. Again, it's just having lunch at a meeting, and Barry was like, "Sean, I think you're missing a few things of that." And I think the key thing is understanding and listening. But I know, like Barry knows, because we do a lot of clear aligner treatment, is that technology evolves, right? So you can get frustrated at a certain point earlier on in the technology process because it's not there yet. You don't see the huge benefit. But Barry and I are definitely, very similar in that we are stubborn to continue trying because we see the potential of this. You know what I mean? Right. And I think just understanding what's behind the technology, then you can have a little more patience with it. But like anything else, I mean, I think it's a good and bad. Do you really want technology to be like you push the button and it just does magic for you? The truth of the matter is nothing works that way. There's no silver bullets. There's no one thing. People ask me, Sean, what's the one thing that I can do for this or that? There's no one thing. If it was easy, everybody would do it. It's hard. And so we all have to set up process. And that's where Barry really changed the game for me and just understanding. So,
yeah, I love the fact that you stepped away. Barry brought you back in. But Barry learned his workflow from you. So I love that. But Barry, please.
Yeah. You got the Mutual Admiration Society going here.
Yeah.
So a couple of things right off the bat. My practice is a smaller practice. But I think DM can be effective both for big practices. I think even better for bigger practices, but it certainly helps in my practice too. But the number one tip, and when we get it, as we get into a conversation of workflow, is my suggestion is to make sure that all patients are on it. Now, I have all my clear aligner patients on it. That's 82% of my practice. I just had a conversation with Philippe, the CEO of the company today, and talking about how fixed appliance monitoring has some advantages too that I haven't even explored yet. So I don't do it simply because I don't know about it, but it will get there. But for your if you want to just, let's say, take your clear aligner segment, especially if your practice is heavy in clear aligners, is to make sure you have everybody on it. Because I think the first major inefficiency, that first fork in the road, is having two protocols. You got some people on it, you got some people not on it. And as you know, that the staff doesn't know what to do, and it's a bad thing. So I think the best thing to do is get everybody on it. I don't charge extra for it, because if you charge extra for it, that gives people the opportunity to decline it. So I think it's a thing that should be bundled. Bump up your fee a little bit if you can. I mean, raising fees has been a hard thing for a long time, but now I think we have more justification than ever with inflation and everybody else. So it's probably a time to reevaluate your fees. I know Chris Benson said that too, but I do think it's important that everybody go on it. So that's number one. As far as workflow, what you're asking me specifically, it's actually easier than you'd think. So number one, it's the product that sells itself, because I'm charging for it, but it's a product that sells itself at the new patient exam. I would say that my TC spends maybe a minute. We have this great technology that we're going to give to you, or if it's your child, that's going to allow us to monitor your treatment remotely using your smartphone. And everybody just says, oh, that's really cool. I have never, Sean, and maybe you have, I have never had any, but this is the big number one question that I get. Well, aren't people going to feel like you're charging them all this money for treatment? And in New York, a full orthodontic treatment for an adult is like, $7,000, $8,000. I mean, it's not inexpensive. Don't people feel like you're ripping them off because you're not seeing them in the office? And the answer is, I have never, ever had. We've had some baby boomers, like patients in their 70s, really want to come in and see us, because I think maybe that's like the activity of the day. But it is not an issue at all for millennial parents and Generation Z patients to understand using technology with their smartphones. So everybody thinks it's cool. So it's a very, very brief discussion with my TC. Doesn't take a lot of time out of the consult. We're going to use this technology, show them a brochure. Everybody thinks it's groovy. At that point, if it's the same day start, the patients are sent an activation code. It's a two-step process that's very easy. They're sent an email and activation code. They go to the email. There's a step 2. They download the app and they're in. And then it just sits there until they come in to actually start their appointment. But basically, they're queued up. Their smartphones are queued up. We can install it on the parents' phones as well, which I recommend. And that's it until they come in to get started. So if it's the same day start, we already have full records and a scan, because we do that on every new patient exam. Patients, we use OrthoFi, so patients sign their contract and off they go. And they come back 3 weeks later to get their aligners. The day they come to get their aligners, they routine visit. We schedule an hour for that. That's a generous amount of time. I do suggest, if you're new to it, maybe give it an hour and 15 minutes, because it does take there's a learning curve for your staff to train the patients. So give yourself a little bit of extra time so that you don't get a mutiny from the staff. But even the training is very easy after patients get their attachments on and they get their basic aligner instructions. They pull the app up on their phone, and there's a tutorial right on their phone. So they sit there and they listen to it. They then get up. We give them we're using the ScanBox Pro now, the little scope. It's the newer ScanBox. They go over to the mirror. They do their first scan. Sean, out of 3 to 5 minutes, you're the efficiency expert. How long does that first scan? 3 to 7 minutes, depending on the patient.
5 minutes is usually what we give time, but
and they're done. And that's the workflow. So that's kind of the initial onboarding process. So you don't really have to make a lot of significant changes to your workflow, other than, again, maybe giving your staff a little bit of extra time just until they get in the groove.
So again, everything you've said so far is exactly how we do it. Everybody using aligners is on it. Um, we use it the same way you mentioned, because we're onboarding now. Chairside at delivery of trays is where we give them their scanner, teach them how to use it and what have you. But my question is really now geared towards what happens now the patient leaves and what goes on week to week. So they scan, and whichever one of you wants to answer, unless your protocol is very different, Sean. When the patient goes home and scans, they're scanning once a week, I assume, or however often you're changing trays. Who's viewing it? What kind of responses are they getting? How are you setting your preferences in a broad way, so to speak? And what kind of problems have you faced with that? Because I know that can be challenging for a lot of people. Either one of you can jump on this one. Feel free to take it.
I'll take the beginning of it, then Sean, I'll let you take over. So a couple of other things that happen at that visit that are very important. One is to make sure that you go into the goals section of dental monitoring, because there is a section now that the AI can look for things. It can look for when you've achieved class 1 molar and canine. It can look for when your overbite is corrected. There's a variety of things that you can set those up for. For example, you can have it know that at stage 25, it's supposed to be looking for certain numbers of these things. So goals are important to set up. Takes a minute or two. It's really easy. The second thing to do is to make sure that you know when that patient needs to come back in, because we're doing, it used to be called appointment on demand. Now it's called OWN, only when needed. So a patient, for example, who doesn't need IPR or maybe gets IPR at the first visit and doesn't have any attachments that have to appear on the way, and they have 35 stages, they're going to leave without an appointment. But the software is automatically now set. This is something we used to have to do, but now it's automatically set, where the patient will get a notification X number of aligners before the end. I recommend 2 to 3 before the end. So if they have 35, they're going to get a notification at 32 automatically that says, well, there's 2 notifications, one that goes to the patient on the patient-facing app, and the other that goes to the dashboard to your dental monitoring coordinator, because there's 2 different platforms, one for the patient, one for you and your staff. So the patient's going to get a notification that simply says, please call for an appointment. Your dental monitoring coordinator is going to get a notification simultaneously that says, patient's on 32 of 35. Please notify the front desk that this patient is going to need an appointment for either Invisalign refinement records or to finish up. And that information goes to the front desk. So all of that's kind of queued up at the beginning. The other milestones that you're going to set on there is, let's say you need IPR at stage 12. So you may have that set up at stage 11, that a notification goes to the patient. Do not move to your next aligner. You need an appointment first, and then again, a notification will go to your staff. So those events are sort of set up automatically so that you don't have to babysit on a daily basis, and that the patient gets notified, whatever the information is, to come in for that appointment.
And on that note, do you ever have patients? I mean, the first thing I would say out loud is, wow, so they're leaving without an appointment. I'm not saying I disagree. I'm just saying they're leaving without an appointment. How often do you find patients fall through the cracks? Because that's going to be the most common question you're going to get from people.
The answer is not any. I mean, it's still possible, but you have a dental monitoring coordinator who's monitoring the dashboard. There are some other things that the dashboard will show you. For example, you can search by scan date. So, for example, if you want to see all patients who haven't done a scan in 2 weeks, you can pull that up. You can see patients that haven't done a scan in 4 weeks. So we're on a weekly basis auditing outliers, out of those stragglers. And I would say 10 to 15% of patients are friggin' disasters. Just, like in every practice, they're not wearing their aligners, they're not brushing their teeth, they're not wearing their elastics, they're not doing their scans. So you set up protocols with your dental monitoring coordinator to follow up on those. You can generate reports on a regular basis. So it makes it much more difficult for someone to slip through the cracks, because you have a protocol set up to make sure that doesn't happen.
Got it. And so if someone has 35 trays, you're not just default scheduling an appointment for 35 out and saying at least you're on the books, because you know that your coordinator is going to be able to catch it when the system generates the notice.
Correct.
And so, Sean, is the protocol that Barry described similar to the one you're running right now? And if so, I'll ask you a couple of questions about it.
Yeah, it's pretty similar. I mean, to me, Glenn, the thing is, I work the process down to create as much capacity in my practice as possible. So I don't like 60-minute appointments. I like 2s and 4s. I like 40 minutes. I like 20 minutes. You have to get team buy-in to the point that, like, we say, okay, we bond attachments, we deliver aligners, and we do that in 40 minutes. We're going to also add DM, and we're still going to do it in 40 minutes. That's a challenge. But you need to, first of all, gain the buy-in from the team. The clinic has to understand why you're doing this and why it saves them time. Then it's well worth the effort. And then I think things become much easier. I just try to keep it simple. That first visit, our main focus is to bond attachments, deliver aligners, start the case, and get them on DM. I don't do all the other fluff. Some offices like to do IPR from the beginning. They do everything. I don't like to overwhelm my patients because our main goal is to start them in treatment and start them with DM. A lot of patients, if it's a simple case, then they're scheduled out whenever I need it. But a lot of other cases have AP correction. They have, IPR, all those things. We set them up for a 12-week check. And then that's usually about a 20-minute appointment. And then we stage it. And then it's a very good time also to have the patient say, hey, how's the app, the monitoring working, all that stuff. We know that already from the back end. But just one change is that we do a 40-minute. And if we need to, then we can always add a 20-minute later, so that the patient doesn't have to learn how to do DM and how to wear the aligners and how to wear the elastics. And by the way, we're going to also IPR your teeth today and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, pretty much.
But just for a second, did you just say, Sean, a little earlier, though, that there are cases in which you do schedule an appointment rather than just rely on the notice from the system?
It just depends. I think we're a little bit earlier in the game than Barry because we re-implemented just a few months ago. But it does depend. I mean, we run the schedule several months out, so it can be done and adjusted. But most of it is, like Barry said, our coordinator, and I have one, that runs, hundreds of cases in monitoring. They leverage the technology to be able to probably monitor, 50 plus patients a day, at least, and just notifications. Once you set up the process, it runs pretty quickly. I think at first when you onboard, we felt it was very sensitive, like it would just highlight everything, all this other stuff. There's things also you can train your team member to make decisions on beyond the AI. And then there's other decisions that the doctor has to check. So this is not something that all of a sudden, like, hey, DM takes over everything. You don't have to ever see your patient ever again. If that's your thought process, you're clearly mistaken. The practice of orthodontics still needs some input. The key is that you're reducing the noise and you're focusing on the 20% that matters. 80% is already happening on the other end.
Yeah. Another way to maybe look at it is that you're automating the routine processes. You're automating the things that could be automated, the things that don't need user input, and there's a lot of them. By the way, Sean, you got to get rid of that 12-week appointment. That's your next step, but you can talk about that later.
Yeah, well, we do it for IPR and elastics. That's the only one that we do, but the only reason that I do it is because I still want them 40 minutes. If you get down to 40 minutes and starts, that increases your capacity by a pretty large percentage of how many patients you can start. But yeah, we're still working on that. Like I said, for us, it's still an evolving process, and that's where Barry helps, give his expertise. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty similar workflow. We send the patient out. We do 3 aligners before the end, and then at that stage, they come in for a scan. And, it's either for scan retainers, we call a pre-debond check, or a refinement scan. You make the decision then at that point as to where the patient gets placed. Now, we live on an island, and we see very heavy military patient base. So another unique thing and advantage for us is that we see patients that travel between islands. We have patients that live half of their time here in Japan. Some people deploy. They're in Europe and Asia, all kinds of places and military bases. So DM has been a game changer for us because some of these patients, we do everything. We give them their scan box. We give them the application, and we honestly don't see them, till the very, very end, because you can do sometimes additional aligners just off of photos. Sometimes you can work with colleagues that have a scanner elsewhere, they're in Italy, they're deployed. We can find someone that has a scanner there. They scan it. We get the scan code. We can always continue their treatment. So rarely do patients have to transfer. So for us to have a high military patient base has been a huge advantage.
Nice.
But yeah, it has to be
You know what
weekly
pops into my
changes.
mind though? If it's working well for those patients and you're seeing them less, then it should work. It should work for other patients as well. It's interesting that when compelled to do it, like we have the same thing. Kids go off to college or wherever.
Yeah.
When compelled to do it, and you stretch it sort of more to the nth degree, and it's
Yeah.
still working well. That's important information, I think, for the patient that lives down the street that probably doesn't that can use the same protocol.
But I have a question for both of you gentlemen. So the one that we haven't talked about yet, which I'm trying to get us to, which is the patients at home and they're scanning. Who is reviewing that scan? And just for those out there who may not even have dental monitoring, someone's reviewing that scan. Is it the same person every time? How are they trained? What's their background? Like, I think it's important to get into that because I think there's a lot of people who think you get some remote monitoring software in your practice and the assistants just somehow watch it, right? Which is, I'm sure, a massive problem. And so I'd love to hear from both of you. Who is the person that's reviewing it? If you were going to hire them, what are you looking for? And what's their day-to-day responsibility when they respond to patients? Patient scans, it looks good. What does the patient hear? Patient scans, it doesn't look so good. What does the patient hear? So again, I'll let either one of you take the answer to that one.
Sure, I'll start it. You have to have a source person. So if somebody's supposed to do it, nobody ends up doing it until you have someone that's in charge of it. So I think it depends on the size of your practice. In certain practices, you could have someone that works as a clinical team member and does this on certain time frames, maybe the slower morning or whatever. We see quite a few hundred patients on monitoring. So we have a dedicated person. That's Sherry. She's our dental monitoring coordinator. Anybody in the clinic could jump in and do the role, but she's our main source person that does this. There was a point when she was having, there's patients or team members who are pregnant or have kids, and this is to work virtually is a huge advantage. So nowadays it's a nice advantage to have people that can work from home, that do virtual exams or virtual monitoring for us. But she's the source person. She will relay all the information, communicate with the patients. And then when the doctor's needed, we use Slack to communicate, and she'll say, hey, Dr. Holliday, take a look at patient X, she'll review certain questions. Can you check on that kind of things? But I think, back to Barry's conversation, when you set the protocol, you set goals, all this other stuff that helps to alleviate all these routine process so that they're able to take a lot of that work for you. Nice.
So Barry, answering that question, picking up where Sean left off, patient scans, who's looking at it? Is it just the assistant? When is the protocol so that the doctor gets involved? And if things are going well, what is the patient told?
So I have a smaller office. So I had one clinical staff member, Marisol, who's our dental monitoring coordinator. And I would say on a daily basis, probably spends about 20 minutes. So we're talking about a smaller practice, 250 starts per year. So I can't remember the rest of your question, though. So you said, what did you do?
The patient scans, Marisol takes a look at it.
Gotcha.
And what is she saying to them if it's looking good? What is she saying if it doesn't look good? And when does it get passed off to you, and what happens then?
Okay. So number one, let's say on an average day, we get 25 scans that come in. So interestingly enough, for a vast majority of them, she doesn't have to say anything because the protocols, you can customize the language to your own language. And here's tip number 2. It should never say your aligners aren't fitting as expected. Don't ever say the aligners are not fitting because the patient goes, well, the aligners are not fitting. At least that's what they say in New York. I'm sure they say the same thing in Texas. So we've changed that wording to your teeth are not moving as fast as expected, or your teeth haven't completed the expected movement. It's a much better way. We just get less blowback from patients when we say, well, your teeth just were moving slower this week. So that's a tip. So of the 25 on our dashboard, they have a mobile app now, which is fabulous because now if a patient sends us a direct message, it just pops up like a text. So, hey, I lost my, I'm at dinner. I lost my aligner. What should I do? Either me or Marisol just respond in real time. Just go on to your next set. So the mobile app is fabulous. I barely use the desktop anymore. Having said that, of the 25, I'm gonna say 15 are goes. So the AI looks at the fit of the aligners, sees the tracking, everything's fine. That patient gets a green. Marisol does nothing other than just check them off. There's no other action because the patient has automatically gotten a message that says your doctor and team have looked at your scan. Everything looks great. Your teeth are moving as expected. Great news. You can move on to your next aligner. There's no action that she has to take. I find the AI to be super picky. So I am, after using it now for 3 years, if the AI says that the patient's tracking really well, I'm completely 100% confident that it is. So let's take that other 10. So of that other 10, I would say probably 5 are going to be minor things. And to get to the end of the question before I fill in the details, we have written protocols. So I've created decision trees with Marisol. So any situation, she looks at her decision tree and she knows whether that's something that she needs to alert me or the front desk or somebody else. So, but meanwhile, so she's checked off the ones that have goes. The ones that are, let's say, slight unseats, that's what the software calls it, where it's like the patients, that you look at their timeline, they're scanning on a good cadence, they're getting all greens, and they have one instance where they've got a little bit of non-tracking. She just checks that off. She doesn't have to tell me. Patient's going to be prompted to take another scan in 3 days and use Chewies, and they'll probably be fine. So now we filter down that 25 to maybe a handful, less than 5. So she'll know what to do with those. It may be someone who's had multiple no-goes, who has gross non-tracking or is, getting to that point. By the way, the AI looks at like 170 different parameters. So it looks at recession. It looks at hygiene, inflammation. So there are those of the, let's say 5, there's going to maybe be 3 that now, and we have a very 3 that she'll want to let me know about. And we don't use Slack. We use something more sophisticated. It's called Post-it notes, because my office is small enough but she'll leave me a note on my desk. Ex-patient, like just yesterday, the AI picked up some gingival recession. It's a class 3 case. AI picked up some gingival recession. And, what do you want to do, doc? And then I'll go back to her and say, we should get this patient in. I think she needs a refinement, maybe have some more lingual root torque. But it sounds like your dental monitoring coordinator is going to be slammed with all these decisions. But the truth is you filter out most of it because it's just nothing to worry about. It could be an attachment off. Oh, where is it? It's on that second molar. Is that molar tracking? Yes. We'll keep an eye on it. So on a day-to-day basis, the number of patients that I'm informed about is 5 or less. And it's usually the routine stuff, it's a recession, hygiene issue. But she also even knows if, let's say, there's a hygiene issue, she can actually go on to the patient's scan, mark it up. There's a right built into the app. She can circle those teeth, and we have like a stable of pre-canned responses, and she just sends that to the patient, and it says, please work on your brushing, or see this tooth that's not tracking. This is the one we want to use your Chewy. So on an average day, it probably takes her 20 minutes first thing in the morning, and then maybe she'll check it after lunch for another 10 minutes, and that's it.
Okay. And it's brought to you when there's just something she has a question on.
Right. And that's defined by me. So she knows where the red lights are, where it's like call the patient. Like we have different decision trees. It may be call the patient. It may be alert Dr. Glaser. So that's all sort of pre-scripted ahead of time.
Okay. So we were talking beforehand, as you mentioned, and one of the things I said is, we're new to this. I'll be the first to admit I am not an expert in this software. Doug is really the driving force behind it in terms of the day-to-day operations. It's not an excuse. It's just kind of letting you know where I lay in all of this. And, I see a fair number of patients who come in where I know that it's not working as optimally as it should. I'm doing something wrong somewhere, because the opposite of what I've heard people complain about is it's too picky. I'll see people come back with, aligners that fit meh, good. Like, Larry David would say pretty good, right? Like they're fitting pretty good, but they're not fitting exceptionally well. When that patient comes in and there are 15, 20 aligners in the treatment, and that and that aligner looks like a second skin over the teeth. You can't see it. You don't even know. You tell them, can you put it in for me so I can check? And like they say, yeah. And I go, great. You just made me look like an amazing orthodontist, right? It doesn't look like that. It looks like I can see a little bit of space around it somewhere, even on the incisal edges perhaps, or maybe in the bicuspid region. And it just doesn't look perfect. Should I be accepting that and going, no, this is with intolerances? Or, hey, Glenn, you're clearly doing something wrong, because when the system's working right, it really should be looking for that second skin.
Yeah, I would say, Glenn, because, well, Barry's the expert on the software on this end, but I will tell you, I'll share the mistakes that we've made in the journey, because I'm a little bit past you on this part. And I think the first 6 months is really a tough time because you're just trying to work all of this stuff out. But you need to button that up. I think the team is a little more tempted of just letting something slide and letting like force goes and stuff. And that defeats the purpose, because at the same time, their mindset is, oh yeah, just change your aligners every 7 days. And we've changed our language to the patients saying, on average 7 days, but the application in monitoring, we're going to advise you how long you need to wear it. There shouldn't be that cadence of expectation, because everybody's biology is different. And then their compliance is also different. So there are some patients that just need to wear it longer. And sometimes they need to change every, 10 days, 14 days, whatever it may be. But the key thing is that now that is a shift in mindset and saying, okay, you're going to change as needed when the fit is appropriate, as opposed to just like, oh, it's been 7 days. I mean, the patient should really be changing right now. No. They should be changing when the fit's appropriate. And I think the other part of the application I want to highlight that Barry was mentioning is that you get so much information off of there as to the patient behavior and their performance, because you're going to see certain patients are green all the way through. That's that one patient, like you said, second skin. A lot of patients, especially more complex cases, you're going to see green, and then towards the end, they're going to start getting red. And then that's when like, hey, this is time to do an early refinement. Try to get them in. Maybe it's 6 aligners before the end, not 3, but you're able to jump ahead of time. And then you're going to have other patients that it's like green, and then they scan every other week. Then you have red with green, and then red, green. That tells you a whole different perspective as to the person, because that we're not just looking at teeth. You have a person and their behavior and their motivation to drive the change, and their compliance becomes just as important as anything else. I don't care how perfectly you set up your ClinCheck or whatever digital treatment plan. If the patient's not fully committed to the treatment, you need to know that. And that's where the dashboard can let you know that. And that's where our team, part of it is in understanding, hey, look at that area. That tells you quite a bit as to who you're kind of dealing with. And at the same time, just modify and adjust it and coach them on that process, because, they're wearing 14 hours a day, not the, 20 or whatever. They're skipping out. They tell you the story and they fess up. Hey, I just went on a trip. So, hey, go back to the best fitting one. You recoup. But what happens in those patients, if you don't have monitoring, they come back and there's 30 weeks have occurred, or whatever weeks intervals.
They're off the rails.
Yeah. They're way off the rails. So far off that it's like you got to restart all over in the treatment.
No, but they fit me, Dr. Holliday. Look, they fit.
I wear them all the
time. I know.
Where are they? Oh, I didn't know I needed to bring them to the appointment.
Yeah, I know exactly.
Oh, they're in the car.
Don't get me started with that one.
So that's a go back to something too, and you get to coach them. There are some that you get back on track, but the others, then you have a different conversation when they come in for the appointment. And that already. In the morning huddle, we discuss it, and we already have that already at the get-go. And I would say from a psychology perspective, you have to understand that monitoring performance drives better performance. They know that. There's studies that look at that from a business perspective, that when people think that they're being watched, they actually perform much better. And that's how we do. I mean, that's why ABO cases are way better. That you're going to test that case out. You know what I mean? When you are lecturing.
That's why Weight Watchers does what they do. People get on that scale every week for a reason, because it enhances their weight loss.
Yeah.
I go back to the thing for a second. I think the motivation's a really good conversation, Sean, but before it goes too far along, it's the power, use the force go. You have to make sure. So what's a force go? So a patient gets a no-go. The AI sees something not tracking, and it automatically sends them a message that says, your teeth haven't completed their movements. Please keep the current aligner. Now, there is a little button that your staff has that says force go, where you can say, well, maybe it's a case, a lateral is completely not tracking, but sagittal correction is going really well. You decide you're going to ignore the lateral and you'll deal with it in refinement. And you could either ignore that tooth as a way to set it up so the software doesn't look at that tooth, or you can hit this button that says force go, which means that no matter what this next scan looks like, the patient is allowed to move ahead. So you have to check and make sure that your staff isn't forcing patients ahead. That would probably be my most likely explanation for what you're seeing. Because maybe they think it's close enough, but there is that decision, there is that human interaction with the AI that can muddy the waters a little bit. So I think maybe it would be worthwhile to take a look and see these particular patients, what's going on with the dental monitoring coordinator, or what's happening when they're sending their scans in.
Well, it's like Sean said, nothing's just out of the box. Go set it up and it works and everything's great. And, all three of us have had our share of teaching in our lives, right? And we recognize the fact that, a good new process being put into place is akin to a great chef, right? The old saying, never trust a skinny chef, because, they make soup or they make, whatever, poi. I'm going to use that one for you, Sean. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something out in Hawaii, shaved ice. And they taste it, right? And then maybe it needs a little more of this, a little more of that. And I think my guess is that in this particular case, at least for us, maybe there wasn't enough tasting that was gone on, not enough training, not enough, and I'm not saying that's the case, but it sounds like a really good answer that, hey, the AI is saying, look at what we're looking at. This is not a go. There's something on the fence here. And the team is looking, go, no, it looks good enough, right? And again, that might be the case. Is there something else that you can think of? Let's just say that my team is so perfectly trained and they know exactly, and they're never going to say go when they shouldn't. Is there any other settings within there that could possibly cause somebody to not have a perfect fit and yet be told, keep going?
So as I said before, your staff could also, even if they're not forcing to go, you can silence teeth. So again, you can tell the AI, look, because otherwise, let's say everything is, 31 teeth are tracking perfectly, but there's one tooth that's continually giving you a no-goes, and you just, for whatever reason, decide you're going to deal with that in the next bunch of aligners. You can go ahead and tell the AI to silence that tooth and not look at it. So that might be something that they may be doing too. And now the tooth's not tracking, but the AI is ignoring it. So that would be a second place. John, can you think of anything else?
Yeah, Barry, you're the expert on that end. I don't know if there might be a threshold. I know that the sensitivity of the scan is another area, because we found that the sensitivity is way too high. So we adjusted some of that, but that's
I didn't even know you could do that, because I actually have called them up a couple of times and I'm like, I don't know what the tolerance is for a no-go. Because sometimes I can't even see it. I actually wanted us to dial that down a little bit. They told me that they can't do that yet. Maybe that's something new, but yeah. So Glenn, I've typically found the opposite, that they're it's like, you get, it's a rare patient where, they smile and you can't see the aligners. It's usually, decent fit, but I have found, if anything, that there's a lot of patients that are probably being unnecessarily held back. And I'm not aware of a process to change that calibration. Like, you can't turn it up to 11. So I don't know how to do that.
Spinal Tap reference. And so just in the interest of time, because we've been going a little while now, one quick question for both of you. You've got a patient who has 42 aligners. They're an AP correction case. There's elastics involved. Are you trusting enough, Barry? I'll throw this one to Barry, Sean, just because you said he's had more experience in the more recent past. Barry, do you trust a 42 aligner AP correction case with elastics in aligners to say, as long as it says go, I don't need to see them for 42 weeks or 38 weeks or 39 weeks in your case?
Yes, but there are some backstops. There are some guardrails. That would probably be a better way to say it. So what we'll do on that software is we'll go in and we'll go to our goals section, and I'll tell the AI, that if I wanted to check for class 1 molar and canine on both, let's say it's a unilateral case, so the class 1 on the left, class 2 on the right, I wanted to check for class 1 molar and canine at stage 25. And if it's not there, then I'm going to get alerted. So I think that it's a little bit hard. I mean, patients don't typically get good buccal shots. As much as you can push that scan box around, it's like, it's not mirror shots. It's like kind of like when,
Right.
So class 2s look like class 1. So you got to be a little careful with that as far as sagittal correction. Having said that, I mean, if you've got a patient with a foot of overjet and they're on stage 20 and you could see that it's coming along swimmingly, you can get on a gross level, you can get a good sense that they're probably tracking along. But no, I do think there should be guardrails set up, especially for the severe open bites, the severe deep bites, the severe sagittal cases. I think that those require a little bit more of a check.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair answer.
Yeah. Maybe the other way, maybe easier to do is say we're going to see him after the first box, which is 15 weeks.
Nice.
And I don't think that's a bad thing either.
And the thing is that, the goal setting is one. Barry knows more about that than I do, but we've recently implemented that, which is advantageous. But we also we have a virtual column in our schedule. And if there's some concern from the AP correction, you can always direct your team member and say, 8 weeks from now, let's regroup on this case, add that to, and they'll usually just put it on the schedule so that they know that she and I will look at the progress scan on that patient to look at their AP. And like Barry said, I mean, I'm looking at maybe 5 cases a day. You know what I mean? It's really not that bad. And when we add that, but that's something that you can monitor. But I guess what I want to get back to your comment, Glenn, is that we don't necessarily just not see the patient until week 42. They're being monitored weekly. You know what I mean? So the key thing is, when does doctor input need to go into a case? And, the elastic is something that you can manage. The goal setting is a new feature that's been added, which is very powerful, and then it'll alert you. But at the same time, you can always, I guess, an analog hack to that is just basically say, okay, you project out how long you think a normal case that complies with elastics, how long would you want to see that? 8 weeks, 12 weeks, or whatever. You can always set an alert or something in your practice management software or into the dashboard and say, okay, I want to see that patient. Just let's look at the photos and see how they're doing.
Nice. And I agree with you. I think my question was poorly stated in the sense that, would you let them go 42 weeks is one question, which is obviously not what I really meant. What I was trying to get across really was, is your faith in the process such that if you're monitoring it on a regular basis, that you could go that distance? And you answered, yeah. I mean,
absolutely. And we had patients that go that long.
Yeah. It makes perfect sense. Now, just again, in the interest of time, because we're going to have to wrap it up shortly, both of these gentlemen have amazing online educational opportunities for you. If you go to Sean, orthomasterclass.com, right? Again, orthomasterclass.com. You can get some great education from Sean. For Barry, clearalignercourse.com, correct? So Clear Aligner Course for Barry, Ortho Masterclass for Sean. And you have the opportunity to get really good education on topics related to like what we're talking about now and clear aligners and what have you. And I just want to throw this out there. I didn't mention this to you guys beforehand, but I said if there was time, and there really isn't a lot of time. But with what we've got, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ambush both of you here and say, give me your best 2, 3, 4 tips, if you will, dogmatic, steps, whatever you want to call them, for people who are trying to take their aligner game to the next level. What are 2 or 3 best practices you would throw out there, each of you? And again, whoever wants to start can start first. But I know that you guys have so much information, in your heads related to aligners. It's like the old story of trying to teach me the Torah while I stand on one foot, right? Teach me the entire Bible while I stand on one foot, right? In your case, either one of you, what are a few things you'd throw out to people who are really trying to take their aligner game to the next level, not only in terms of better outcomes, but efficiency as well?
The biggest challenge, I think, is just understanding that even professional athletes have a coach. No one at their peak performance just relies on their own. And I think, whether it's Barry, me, or lots of other courses, we're in an amazing time where you can have the best of the best to learn from. in really cost-effective, time-effective ways. I just do micro learns, weekly cadence of courses. To me, that's what virtual is about. And that's what I love to teach. But I would say you have to hone your craft. I get frustrated sometimes seeing how people struggle with certain parts. And the orthodontics is not about brackets and wires. It's about moving teeth, making an impact, driving change, and making sure that we're able to, achieve the correction of the malocclusion. And technology has 3 stages. One is disruption, which for many people, clear aligners are still disruptive. Other one is imitation, which means that they just basically take their bracket and wire practice and implement the same systems when they do clear aligners. And so now they're just spending a lot of money to do the same darn thing. And then the epitome level is augmentation, which is where monitoring clear aligner treatment, when you change the way that you run your practice to fit to those strengths of the appliance, that's where the magic happens, because that's where your practice grows, your efficiency improves, and it doesn't become an expense, more a leverage to be able to drive better, more positive change. So I think that would be my main thing, is understanding how do you augment your workflow and making sure that you achieve amazing clinical results. I mean, that's what I love to treat all kinds of different cases. And I think, everybody has their comfort level, but you should always be aiming to make some small improvements in that whole process to get more comfortable with it. That augmenting your digital workflow is, I guess, my quick down and dirty advice.
No, it's fair enough. I totally get it. And Barry, what about you?
So number one, I agree with Sean. I think number one is still always education. Dr. When I was, I know we have to wrap it up. A quick story. So when I was second year ortho resident, the AAO meeting was in St. Louis, and I didn't have a penny. I literally didn't have a penny to my name. So everybody went off to St. Louis, but I didn't. But I came into the clinic every day. I didn't look at it as a vacation. I was doing lab work, and Dr. Gianelli walks in. And he says, "Barry, why aren't you at the meeting?" And I said, "Oh, Dr. G, I can't afford to go." And I'll never forget what he said, because he was like, Dumbledore. He was like Dumbledore and Gandalf all wrapped up into one. And he had those little half-moon glasses, and he put his hand on my shoulder. And he said, "Barry, let me tell you something. When it comes to continuing your education, you can't afford not to go." And he smiled and walked out. And it took me 30 years to figure out exactly what I meant. So you can't afford not to keep up with education, which brings me to another quick story. And my second tip, which is one of my favorite movies, is Moneyball. The great general manager, Billy Bean, and in a pivotal scene in the movie, looks at Art Howe, who's the old school, old dog, doesn't want to embrace technology analytics. And he looks at him and he says, "Adapt or die." And, the pace of innovation is so fast these days that, and it's scary. Change, even a little change in most people's practices is uncomfortable. It's unpleasant. It's not easy, but you have to adapt or die. So I think the more you train yourself and your mind and your staff to embrace change for the betterment, A, of the patients, and hopefully B, of the practice, I think the more you can get that kind of mindset, I think the easier clear aligner treatment becomes.
Nice. And again, I know time is a problem here. We're running late, but I just want to throw out one more question to both of you. And because I feel like I have to. Again, my respect for both of you is through the ceiling. And again, I would love to keep this conversation going for 8 hours. And I know you'd give more information over those 8 hours than I could ever absorb. But for that person out there who's listening to this, who is not involved with dental monitoring yet, or any sort of remote monitoring, and they say, "Geez, I'm on the fence about this. If I do this with every one of my patients without really knowing what I'm doing, it's going to cost me a lot of money. And I may not, bring in best practices right off the bat. This is a huge investment. I trust you guys, but I don't know if I want to spend this kind of money." How would you tell that new person who's never done it to get involved? Would you tell them, go get educated on it first? And then you both are in agreement, you got to do it on everybody. Don't pick and choose. It'll create too much trouble. We agree on that. But is it go get educated first and then implement? Or is it do what we're doing, implement, just start finding out what your mistakes are, get the education as you're going through it, take the courses, learn how to do this? Which one of these two would you recommend is the right way to go do this?
So look, I think if you jump in blindly, nobody wants to throw away dollars, and to say, well, we're just going to jump in and spend a year wasting money, and especially these days, I don't think anybody wants to do that. On the other hand, it's, what is it? The perfect is the enemy of the good. So
Right.
I think that get some basic education, take a course. If you go right onto Dental Monitoring's website, there's like an academy there. And there's a variety of videos that you and your staff can watch. So, but I think it's getting a basic level of understanding of how it works and what it does. I mean, as you can see, there's a lot of nuances, which, you're probably at that point now, Glenn, where it's a good time to like circle back with your protocols and like relearn it a second time. And you'll be like, oh, now I get what they were trying to say. So, but I think some basic education, but at some point, you got to take the jump. And I do think, to just one last thing, that look, it's an expense, and technology is an expense, and all of our overheads are going up with all this great technology. But there are ways to mitigate that additional expense. I mean, think about a practice like Sean's. If you can go from seeing 100 patients a day to 60, think about what that does. Fewer clinical hours, fewer clinical staff. I mean, it's the balance sheet is more than just my lab expense, my dental monitoring expense. If you can, let's say, offset with, let's say, lower staffing costs, you can help to maybe, mitigate those costs in other ways. And also maybe if I had dental monitoring 30 years ago, I'd still have a head of hair, And so I think that you also can reduce that stress as well. So, but the fundamental answer is get some basic education, learn sort of like the basics. And then I think you got to just jump in and go for it. I think it's great.
Great. And Sean?
Yeah, I would concur. I mean, to me, you don't want to blindly go into it, but I think at the same point, this is analysis paralysis. You have to execute and follow on the plan. I would say for me, the benefit is reducing appointments, monitoring care much better, reducing compliance issues. And there's an opportunity cost as well. I mean, I know some practices are at different levels, right? So you may want to grow, you may want to, have a better quality of life, less hectic schedule. And sometimes you want to mix of both. And the thing for us is that we were spending so much non-productive time where the opportunity cost comes in that now we can do same day starts. We have I have more time to be able to do calls to my referring offices. We can do marketing things. All of a sudden, my headspace is, so to speak, freed up to be able to do a lot of things that make a much more significant change in the practice. So don't undervalue that perspective. I think it's hard to think of it only in the P&L statement as a line item. I think the other part is saying, okay, how can I save, find out how much each of your visits cost. Most consultants, and when we analyze, we're probably looking at 200 to 250 at least plus per visit cost and hard costs and all the stuff per patient. So if you can even decrease one of those visits, I'm telling you can decrease way more. Right. You're going to be a little bit ahead. But I get it. Technology is like death by a thousand cuts. You're paying for this, you're paying for that, all that kind of stuff. So you're going to want to make sure that you keep the things that add value, but take advantage of the extra time to leverage other things in your practice to grow it, to, see more exams a day, that's what I've done. We had a whole new column of exams because I wasn't seeing 100 patients a day. You know what? That changes. I'm saving, it costs me $10, but if I can produce thousands of dollars more per day, I'm well ahead. Does that make sense? I mean, I'll produce myself into better success than I can save myself nickel and diming all the different costs. And I'm not saying that our cost is significant, what the investment is, but the return on investment is clearly there.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to add one more thing as we close this out. And it's that I love my team as much as anybody out there, right? I mean, in today's day and age, it's kind of tough. But the people I have are great people for as long as I have them. I love on them. But the number one complaint from every orthodontist out there, every business owner out there, is the ability to hire, recruit, hire, and train effective team members for longevity. And I've been an advocate for you can listen to the podcast going back at least a year and a half, 2 years. I've been an advocate saying anything you can automate. Anything you can do to ameliorate the need for another team member, right? If you have 9 team members and you can be overstaffed now and you only really need 7, you are in a really good position when something good happens and someone goes on to dental school or they have a baby and have to be out. But anything you can do to avoid the need to hire another individual will only let you have less gray hair as you get older.
Right? That's also, by the way, why I also decided to jump on board with OrthoFi too, for that same reason.
Yeah, and that's OrthoFi. We use OrthoFi. I love OrthoFi. I do have a financial interest in that company, and I will be the first to tell people that that was a game changer. That's another conversation. I'm not taking the bait from you, Barry. One New Yorker to another. I'm telling you, man. I know you game.
Yeah, no, I can't slip that by you, Ken.
No, that's not getting by me, man. Just one word for you, Barry.
It's the same mindset. It's the same mindset.
Same mindset. Exactly. Anything I can do, because people will ask the question, is it worth it to get OrthoFi? Right? Like you could pay a financial coordinator, but I'm like, the good news is your AR is outsourced, right? You're not chasing people down anymore. And so any place you could say, oh, I have one less headache in my life of a person I've got to do a review with, or a person who's going to have a drama with another person, or somebody who's going to call in sick. The day is going to come. I did an interview with Bob Skopek from the Chicago area a few episodes ago, probably 5-7 episodes ago. He doubled his production, and his team, I think his clinical team is now 2, purely through implementing effective systems. Like I would love to create a mastermind with like you guys, Bob, and like a few others, and just sit on the side and listen to how you're going to take over the world with one team member, because the technology is there to allow us to do it. And I think you've given a very compelling argument for why everybody should consider at least looking into the impact that remote monitoring can have in their lives. And so I just want to say thank you to the East Coast. I want to say thank you to the far, far West Coast, to both of you gentlemen for being here today. And again, from the bottom of my heart, I just want to say thank you. And I feel like there's another podcast interview or an Orthopreneurs University course or some sort of something coming on down the road to follow up out of this, because both you guys have so much to teach. And
my pleasure. Happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks,
and to you, Barry, I say forget about it. To Sean, I say mahalo. But before I let you guys go, and before I end this recording, I just want to remind everybody again, if you want to learn from Barry, and again, I agree 100% with both of them said. That's why I started Orthopreneurs University. You need to have education, always. The day I stop educating myself is the day I quit orthodontics. And I think you can have multiple teachers. You should have multiple teachers in your life. And so this is not an either or, it's a both and. And so for Barry, again, clearalignercourse.com. For Sean, it's orthomasterclass.com. Definitely go there, check it out, take the courses. I guarantee you're going to learn a lot from both these gentlemen. And again, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart and appreciate both of you.